Hey everyone, welcome to the video. I'm John and I'll be hosting you as we jump in the Beretta 92, aka the M9 and its variants. First off, just a quick introduction of myself. I'm just a firearms enthusiast who also loves history, movies, and video games. And all these things usually intersect at the same time in forms of media that we love today in games, television, film. And that's why we're here with this show and channel. It doesn't matter who you are, you've seen guns on screen and they made you feel something. Curious, scared, impressed, and even envious. For the gearheads out there. We're going to get into the gun, some history, its use in real life, and then we'll take a closer look at the gun, how it is to actually shoot, and then we'll bring it back around and talk about some of the most famous uses of the gun in popular media, and perhaps explore some of why it was selected for some iconic roles in games. Disclaimer, this isn't a comprehensive history or a deep look at the technicality of the firearm. This show and channel is meant to be a bridge between the casual consumer of media and the world of firearms. It'll also just be a fun way to see guns you like from media in real life, and if you want deeper dives, I also recommend Forgotten Weapons or Military Arms channel. I mentioned at the top of this video, but we were discussing the Beretta 92, or also commonly known as the US military's designation, the M9, or simply because it's the most iconic gun from this manufacturer, it's commonly referred to as a Beretta. We'll be covering the 92 variant as a whole. We're not going to go into the details of each variant or the specifics around them, besides the examples I have here today. Being that it was a US military service gun for 30 plus years and is still used today, even with the SIG P320 coming in, it's without a doubt that this gun is prolific in regards to its exposure, and most of you out there will recognize it. Simply right off the top, its most iconic role was in Die Hard, as it was the gun of John McClane. And again, as the US sidearm of choice, it found itself in numerous video games, going all the way back to Counter-Strike, up to the most recent Call of Duty. So let's dive into some of the history, and let's bring it back to the guns that inspired the Beretta 92. The lineage is pretty simple and pretty clear. More or less, you have the Beretta M1951, which was the standard handgun of the Italian Navy, Carabinieri, if I'm saying that right, and the Italian National Traffic Police until 1977. The immediate predecessor also was the Beretta 84 in .380 caliber. It's by design, it looks the same, and it's a smaller Beretta 92. You'll recognize it from James Bond. It's the handgun that Halle Berry uses in Die Another Day. The Beretta 92 takes from the M1951 the open slide, the grip, the overall look, combined with a P38, the German gun from World War II, the single double action, and then sharing the locking block design from both those guns. And with that lineage and the inspiration of the Walther P38, we get the Beretta 92. The 92 was first adopted by the Consubin. Again, I don't know if I'm saying that right, but it's essentially the Italian equivalent of the U.S. Navy SEALs. It's the Italian Navy Special Forces. It was also adopted early by the Brazilians, which makes sense considering, Taurus manufactures clones. So the fact that they were early adopters, and that whole lineage there, I mean, it must have meant they really liked the gun. The U.S. military had used the 1911 for a while, well into the 80s. And the guns were starting to get into rough shape, and replacement part orders were delayed in an effort to get the adoption of a new 9mm modern handgun off the ground. The Air Force ran trials, and the Beretta shined through and looked to be a winner. But issues with the testing process made the whole thing moot. The Army came in and they decided they'd do it the right way, in air quotes. It came down to the P226 by SIG and of course the Beretta, and once again the Beretta won out. At the same time, such a big contract for a service weapon in the US military being foreign was a pretty big deal, and something Beretta was deservedly proud of, and a pretty significant moment. In April 1985, the U.S. Army announced the Beretta 92 SBF, or simply 92 FS, as a new service pistol and designated the M9. The M9 first saw use in Operation Just Cause. The gamers out there will recognize that name. And that's where the U.S. invaded Panama to take down Manuel Noriega. So the gun had a rocky start, with failures of the slide flying off, the locking blocks failing quickly, and then there was a whole issue with cheap magazines being ordered and used, which gave the gun some issues. There's a sentiment of resentment for the gun for these reasons. Despite changes made to the locking block in terms of finish and material, it still remains one of the first things to go, and is a pain point to this day, with hairline cracks in the locking block being one of the recurring issues specifically. Even so, with how long it's been in service and that it's still around today, that should still say something about the M9 Beretta 92. The handgun received updates in 2006, mainly for the addition of accessories and peripherals, and was designated the M9A1. In 2014, the U.S. Army announced a new pistol trial called the MHS, or the Modular Handgun System trials, and Beretta developed the M9A3. The handgun was solid, but not enough to win the contract, and the SIG P320 won the contract and was dubbed the M17 and 18. I'll speculate that it won simply due to the fact that it is a modular gun, and it's striker fired, and I think that's what it needed to win, and the M9A3 lacked that. Let's take a look at the gun and talk about what it's like to shoot. So I have two examples of the Beretta 92 personally, and that's what we'll be looking at. It's a good comparison because I have one of the early models on the 92S, which is a version that was seen before the US trials came. So it's a very familiar, but it has a lot of differences to it. This particular handgun is a surplus gun that was used by the Italian police agencies, and this gun was made between 1978 and 1982. Obviously, being a surplus gun, you see a lot of good wear and tear, which I personally like because it adds a lot of character. The Beretta 92 shoots a 9mm cartridge and also has a generous magazine capacity, in part because of the 9mm caliber and because it's being a full-size handgun and with a double-stacked mag. You know, one of the big pros of the Beretta is this magazine capacity, and because of those reasons, you have that. And here you can see a 9x19 cartridge, which is the pistol caliber of choice of NATO. So there it is. So this was my first Beretta. I always liked Berettas because of it being the U.S. service pistol. I thought it was neat growing up for that reason, because it was what our country chose. I'm also Italian, so it was a cool meshing of my Italian-American heritage, I guess you could say. You can see the slide-mounted safety decocker. So it is a safety. It stays in the safe position and doesn't spring back up. Also notable, you see the mag release is at the base of the grip. Another note is that you can see the sights are part of the slide and are very low profile. Because of that, it's just generally hard to get a good sight picture on them because there's no contrast, which is funny because on my shooting gear at the range with this footage, you'll see I was shooting this gun way better than the modern M9A3 for some reason. You also notice the slide exposed barrel. Additionally, like most Beretta 92s, it's single double action. A quick thing on single double action for those that don't know, this is a double action trigger pull. The heavy trigger pull is by design, and you can see that the trigger goes back as the hammer does, and when the trigger breaks, the hammer comes down. A single action trigger pull is when the hammer is back, resulting in less resistance and a more accurate shot. I have a few predecessors and inspirations on hand for the 92 design. I don't have the M1951 like I said. I got rid of those, but I do have a Walther P38 made in the Speerwerke factory. This is an actual take-home gun from a USGI that he took from a German officer that he captured it from. You can see the handgun has an open slide and exposed barrel, which is very familiar, and you have to take my word for it. I'm not going to take it apart, but the locking blocks are present in this gun. Another predecessor I mentioned is the Beretta 84. This one specifically being the 84BB. As I mentioned earlier, this is the gun Halle Berry used in James Bond. It's also got the nickname the Cheetah. You can see the design inspiration for the 92 and this 84. Basically, it looks like a smaller version of it. There's no locking blocks on the 84, I should note. And then also, here's a SIG P226 you can see in comparison of what the 92 competed against. Now we come to the latest version of the Beretta 92 with the Beretta M9A3, the gun offered by Beretta in the MHS trials. Main differences are the smaller grip, fully removable tritium sights, threaded barrel, sand-resistant magazine, the bevel shape for easier loading. These sights, I will say, are so much easier to pick up when comparing the two handguns I have here, and also because this is a flat dark earth multi-tone color, you can see the slide and how it relates to the barrel. Lastly, here's an M17. The M17 is an actual U.S. military surplus, so here's the straight goods. Due to some reasons and changing things up, we got a weird situation where these surplus guns came back into the market pretty quickly. So, instant collectible. This is an M17. This is one of the guns that, was used and part of the first wave of guns that were adopted. In a quick summary of what they're like to shoot, they're both very smooth, very pleasant guns. With the surplus one being my first Beretta, and with how worn it was, I remember being so surprised at what an easy and pleasant shooter was. And then the M9A3 is just a super modern and refined version of that gun, and that's just been performing for years. So naturally, it's the same experience, but way more refined. And the updates and creature comforts make it even better. It's not something I train with a lot because just the aftermarket isn't as vast as some other guns, especially for me as a lefty. Despite that, these are guns I'm never going to get rid of. The Beretta was a handgun I thought was cool as a kid, and shooting it in real life, I was not disappointed at all. I was as I was with other guns, a certain U.S. service firearm, the 1911. Still a great gun, but maybe I had unrealistic expectations for it. So, the fun part of this show, the fun part of what we're doing here, something really unique, I feel, is kind of the analysis of the gun in popular media, why it was used, examples of its use. I think this comes into a more of a critical thinking, artistic, technical kind of crossing of the why, and I think that it'll be fun to break down why some of these weapons were chosen, as props. So the Beretta 92 has been seen extensively through popular media since it was adopted by the U.S. military. In fact, it's almost non-existent in popular media until its adoption in 1985. I'm curious to see if we'll see that with the SIG P320. Nonetheless, I want to list off some places that you've seen the gun. The range of types of media here should plainly illustrate just how prolific the Beretta 92 is in terms of how it's been used in popular media in the last 30 years. So here are the examples of when the Beretta 92 is used in some kind of capacity. Of course, we'll start with Die Hard. We have the Call of Duty games, Three Kings, Hotel Rwanda, The Hurt Locker, Rambo 6, Death Note, Quantum of Solace, Doom, the original Doom 1993, Behind Enemy Lines, Commando, Zombieland Double Tap, Max Payne, Tenet, most recently, Kingsman, The Secret Service, 21 Jump Street, Takers, used by none other than Anakin Skywalker himself,
Get on the ground! Nothing but glorified paparazzi!
KickAss, Shooter, Mission Impossible 3.
This is a Beretta 92M. It's a very accurate close-range weapon. Don't point at me.
Sorry.
The Boondock Saints, The Matrix, Face Off, The Rock, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Counter-Strike, the Battlefield games, Stranglehold, Lethal Weapon, PUBG, Insurgency Sandstorm, Walker Texas Ranger, Last of Us Part 2, Escape from Tarkov, and then of course in Fortnite, but it's a weird kind of 1911 Beretta mix, but we'll count it. So yeah, that's a lot of stuff, and I know I missed a lot of iconic uses, and I definitely did not share anywhere close to all of its uses. That list is very extensive, but I want to select a few of these use cases and explore why it was used in that movie or game, kind of look at it from a critical kind of creative angle, you know, maybe why the directors or writers chose it, or maybe why the armorer came in and decided that this gun communicates these storytelling attributes of the character. So kind of looking at it through that lens. So we got Die Hard, which is generally just a gun porn movie for a lot of people out there, and it makes sense. It'll be the first one I bring up on this channel, and it also will not be the last time. We have John McClane, a New York City police officer visiting California to visit a Christmas party, and lo and behold, some international terrorist attack. John has nothing but his handgun and the shirt and pants he's wearing. He's even barefoot. But fortunately for John, and unfortunately for Hans Gruber, he's got the 92, and that stays with him throughout the film. One of the two most iconic shots in the film with the Beretta is when Marco is approaching John while he's on top of the table shooting him with the MP5. John is on the ground crawling away and eventually sets himself up and unloads to the table with his Beretta close to his chest. This is a pretty iconic scene. There's also some fun movie trivia with it, as Bruce Willis was shooting blanks, and it was so close to his head without ear protection, it actually resulted in him losing some hearing. And then the second most iconic shot of the movie is when John has his faithful Beretta 92 taped to his back with the Christmas wrapping tape. Hans Gruber sees John is unarmed because he's shirtless, or that's why he presumed he has nothing. And then because of this gives John the element of surprise. I mean, at the pivotal moment, John grabs his gun, rips it off his back, and does away with Hans Gruber and the henchman. Oh, and another fun fact, John McClane's Beretta 92 is the same exact prop gun that was used by Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon. For the gearheads out there, also, John McClane's Beretta 92 also featured an extended mag release and slide release modifications made for Bruce Willis. In terms of something else specifically from the movie, there's a moment when Gruber and McClane run into each other. While chatting with Gruber, McClane clears the gun and hands it to Gruber, but Gruber doesn't know this. I guess he clears the mag. I don't know how John does it, it's not very clear, but he does it, and he unloads the magazine, he unloads the gun without Gruber noticing. And what's noteworthy is that the attention to detail in which John holds the slide release down when he's racking the slide forward. That's important because the slide would not go forward with an empty magazine. But that attention to detail is really cool, and that's a great awareness on gun handling and mechanics by the director, by Bruce Willis, by the armorer, whoever was involved in that decision. That was just a cool, neat little attention. Like, no one noticed it. It didn't even need to be done, really. But it's in there, and I appreciate it. So, why was this gun selected for John McClane? Well, it could have simply been something New York City police were using at that time, or maybe by virtue of its service in the military, it communicates that John McClane is a veteran or something, and that he used the gun in his service, you know, communicating that he has training and combat experience. Or it could be just that it's the perfect melding of an American-used gun, but it's Italian by origin, and that fits the motif of the luxurious top-end European guns throughout the film. You have the Walther PPK, you have the AUG, you have the MP5, and you have the H&K P7 squeezecocker. But all the guns used in Nakatomi Plaza Tower, they're all there to tell a story, to tell that these are some significant high-roller terrorist thieves doing this high-tech and elaborate heist. And I think Beretta 92 fits in seamlessly with being a gun for this all-American cop, but then it also fits with the high-end European weaponry kind of motif. I mean, I'm pretty set on that being the reason why, but please let me know what your thoughts are. Moving on to another example and kind of diving in, is the Call of Duty Modern Warfare, the second most recent one to come out. Now, it's not surprising that the Beretta 92 and the M993 are in the game, but what is interesting is that it came later in the form of a DLC in a later season, and it's known as a Renetti in the game. The curious question is, why was this added later and not in the initial launch? And I think it's important to note that the SIG P320 was in the game during release as the M19 standing in for the M17, M18. And with that knowledge, I think it's pretty obvious that they opted for the new US military gun first and foremost, so that it's clear that simply this is the US military handgun. And I think they brought in the old faithful Beretta that everyone knew later on, just due to that gun that everyone always expected in these modern games, and it came eventually. I don't know if there's any goal in trying to get more representation for the new sidearm for the U.S. military. I don't know if this is some kind of signal of changing of the guard. That's what it feels like. Or maybe this is all just overthought. What do you think? Am I overthinking this, or is there some reasoning along these lines of how the Beretta was used in Modern Warfare? KickAss, another example of a movie that shows off the 92 in some glory shots and storytelling ways. It's the gun of choice for Big Daddy, an ex-cop turned vigilante, modeled after a fully armored Batman, I guess you could say. He's a big, imposing man, clad in dark armor, armed to the teeth, and built like a tank. So I think him having the Beretta 92 as a full-size handgun as an ex-cop makes a lot of sense, and I think that was an accurate and justified choice by the prop master or the armorer to have armed him with that. A famous scene from the movie is where we see Big Daddy with the Beretta 92 when he shoots his daughter Hit Girl, and a life lesson about how to take a bullet while wearing body armor. It's just an absurd scene, but it really sets the tone for the movie and these characters. But it also is a great representation of the Beretta 92 being used as a story device in a film. Why do you think Big Daddy was given it? He's obviously a gearhead. He's very proud and traditional. And with those things in mind and some other traits of Big Daddy, why do you think he chose the 92 instead of something like a Gucci 1911? You know, maybe that would have made more sense. Or something like really big, like a Desert Eagle. You know, why didn't he choose those? Again, I think personally they got it right. But let me know if you have any other ideas or you think there was a handgun that made more sense for him. The last example of the Beretta 92 that I'm going to dive into is its use in The Last of Us Part 2. It's a recent video game from Naughty Dog and Sony. The game follows Ellie through the zombie apocalypse, essentially. You can carry many weapons through the game, but one of her handguns of choice is Beretta 92. It basically takes the mantle of modern handgun for the character to carry. It's interesting to note that the gun actually employs some usage of cocking the hammer and a single double action in the gameplay and the animations, which is pretty cool to see in a game. It's just a nice touch. Overall, it's by no means super accurate in representation of everything, but I think the game is super effective at its versatile representation of violence. So why in the apocalypse does Ellie carry a Beretta 92? I think a lot of the weapon decision making in terms of the selection for The Last of Us came down to what would be around in the United States in excess in the apocalypse. And if we look at it that way, the real answer would probably be a 1911 or Glock, let's say above else. But the Beretta is a very fair and fine choice and is up there. Another form of sidearm in the game is a revolver, so she switches between a revolver and a modern handgun. Those are the two choices you have. So that's in the game and that's represented. But in terms of modern magazine-fed semi-automatic self-loading guns, they went with the 92 for the main character, Ellie. Abby, another playable character in the game, does use a Glock or some derivative Glockish weapon. Comparatively, Ellie comes across as a little bit more rugged, living out in the mountains. If we're comparing a Glock and a Beretta, I would guess the Beretta would be more rugged option. It's more so that with Abby, we see her in a more familiar and seed-like state of living in the apocalypse, so I think that's why her with the polymer striker-fired Glock as her weapon makes sense. I know this goes against me painting the Beretta as a sophisticated European gun like I did with the Die Hard example, but when thrown in the context of the game and its setting and the characters, each character was given the right gun. As prolific as the Glock is, the Beretta's service in U.S. military and law enforcement at large make it feel more American, thus more rugged and comparatively backcountry compared to the Glock, I guess. Obviously the 1911 would have been optimal for the more rugged American trait, but I feel the Beretta was more iconic to the average non-military weapon-interested consumer. Again, thanks to its modern service in law enforcement and military. It's kind of a mess of a theory, and I'm really looking at it deep and making exceptions with my other theories, but it's an interesting one, and maybe it's an inconsequential decision that the game designers made. But if I'm going to look at it critically, that's going to be how I paint it. That's going to be how I'm going to reason why those decisions were made between the Glock and the Beretta. Yeah, I don't know. That's my theory, and I think it's got some footing either way, but let me know your thoughts as well. So in closing this inaugural episode of this channel, of looking at guns and movies and their usage and just the guns and their history at themselves, I want to thank you guys for hanging out in this episode and taking this journey as we explore the Beretta 92. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you learned a new interest in firearms from this maybe. But most importantly, I hope this introduced you to the idea that guns used in popular media are more than just props and that they are storytelling devices or they are included for technical reasons, whatever that may be, designed for choices of gameplay, aesthetic, or to communicate character traits and tendencies. Could we be at the twilight of the better days of the 92? I don't think so, but I do think the SIG P320 is poised to explode and get a lot more exposure in media from here on out. I think the Call of Duty Modern Warfare example being one of the prime and first examples of this happening. Nonetheless, the Beretta has had a prolific legacy serving in the Italian, Brazilian, French, Slovenian, South Korean Navy, Turkish, and U.S. militaries, only to name a few, and for serving so many characters in film and TV series throughout the years, as well as yourself playing as Ellie or Soap McTavish or Gordon Freeman, etc., etc. It's always been there. It's always been the faithful sidearm for all these militaries and also your favorite characters and even yourself by virtue of playing these characters. Again, thank you guys for watching and have a good day, and hopefully I see you next time.